we're forecast to lose 32% of our state acreage, 9 million acres between 1997 and 2052. And we're forecast to lose 51% of our farms. What?
Coming up on The Modern Acre, we're talking to Walt Duflock of Western Growers, talking about California's labor challenges.
The Modern Acre is the podcast for builders in ag who think differently. If you'd like to go deeper with The Modern Acre, check out our membership community, The Modern Acre Co-op. You can check the link in the bio for that. The Modern Acre podcast is presented by Corteva Agriscience. Corteva Agriscience is a global pure-play agriculture company that combines industry-leading innovation, high-touch customer engagement, and operational execution to profitably deliver solutions for the world's most pressing agriculture challenges. All right, Tim, we have to address it. We've been delinquent in addressing it.
Don't do it, Ty. Don't do it.
I have to do it. It was poetic, prophetic that the Niners season has come to an end after a Thursday night game. We're recording this on a Friday. Tim, give us your takeaways on the Niners season here as they look to I think a 1% chance of making the playoffs at this point.
Ty, I mean, the vibes have been off all season. The off season was just plagued with injuries and with holdouts, and so just felt like we started the year off not on a good foot, and we just had injuries early in the season, a lot of challenges. Debo's had an off year. It's just been a tough watch all season and just kind of hanging on to hope. And last night was the nail in the coffin of Niners officially getting kicked out by the Rams, but it's pretty brutal. Just really tough as a fan because there's so much talent on the roster, really like the coach and general manager, feel like we have all the pieces and this was going to be a year where we could rebound, but just kind of they've gone so deep the past couple of years, it's just hard to string together these long runs year after year. So it finally caught up to them, unfortunately.
Good analysis, Tim. TLDR, vibes were off. And, this is what happened in 2021. The year after we lost to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, the year after we had the season from hell, so many injuries that year, even worse than this year, and just, never had it. Same thing this year. And I think it was injuries plus bad vibes plus not pulling out critical divisional games. And that's a formula that's going to end in not making the playoffs.
Yeah, just want the season to end. Just already the chatter today about Brock Purdy's extension of Brock Purdy slander. I just can't handle it. I'm just going to have to get off Twitter, Ty. It's just too much right now.
The slander of Brock Purdy, not seeing that's basically end of list of the reasons why I'm happy to not be on Twitter anymore. Not having to see that is just such a blessing.
Yeah, I disavow any Brock Purdy slander.
Well, Tim, next year, I feel like it's going to be a turnaround. I would even go so far to say as the Niners next year have just got to get into farmer mode.
Yeah, now that you're saying it, Ty, I think the Niners are back. I'm all in on the 2025 season.
Oh, we're so back.
Let's go.
Let's go. I love the perspective. And in our household, I'm now shifting all of my focus and energy into the Chargers' unlikely playoff run. So let's see what the Chargers can do this year.
Yeah, just pain for our sports fandom all around this year.
All right, guys. Well, the day has come. We have Walt Duflock from Western Growers on the pod. Walt is the VP of Innovation at Western Growers, and he does a really good job of just trying to summarize ideas, data in the industry that helps inform what growers should do, what ad tech startups should do. He does a ton of writing on LinkedIn. This guy is prolific on LinkedIn, Tim. I'm getting notifications about Walt's posts at all hours, any day of the week. And I always got to check him out because he's always got some interesting nugget. And so we brought him on the podcast to talk about his latest nuggets, and that being on the California Ag Labor Challenge and how automation can help address that, the market dynamics surrounding California and automation. Where is this going? What does this mean for California? He put together a slide deck. He shared on LinkedIn. We're going to dig into that on this call that you guys are going to enjoy. So with that, let's jump in.
Obviously the administration change is going to have a lot of impacts on ag, a lot of impacts on specialty crop. People are talking about immigration. People are talking about tariffs. People are talking about changes in the ag game. And, it's all interesting on the ag tech side. The one change I'm really looking forward to is, I don't know if you're a fan of hers, but I'll call her out. Thank God the evil witch is gone. Lena Hahn is going to be gone from the FTC. She has single-handedly crushed acquisition and a lot of innovation in this country. And I can't wait for a new guy to take the chair there. Get her out of there. She shouldn't be in that role.
No, I think it's super interesting. Like we're in an interesting period with venture and ag tech and kind of just challenging exits and M&A activity. So I think it definitely might spark a little bit more renewed interest in that segment next year once the new administration changes over. Well, we have a ton to dig into here. I know we want to get into a few different topics, but let's set the stage a little bit, learn a little bit more about you and your story, what led you into agriculture and your work with Western Growers.
Yeah, no, it's a tale of two parts. I grew up on two ranches. My mom's ranch was South Monterey County, 5th generation, like your guys. And we've got about 10,000 acres down there. We run cattle on it, and we have some great farming partners that do the leafy greens and the wine grapes. They do a great job. We've done a lot of that in the last 40 years to really get that side of the business going. Then my folks split. I ended up with Summers in El Centro, which was a raw deal. It's kind of hot down in the desert. But I was down there slogging it. That was a lot of hay and cattle for my dad's operation in Imperial Valley. After college at Cal Poly, naturally, went up to Santa Clara, got the law degree, met the wife, did some stuff in tech, a lot of startups. eBay is the one folks have heard of that did well. Joined a couple others that did some interesting stuff, got acquired over the years. And then 2015-ish, a lot of my friends in Salinas were asking about a lot of the stuff in San Jose, and a lot of the guys in San Jose were asking about Salinas. And I said, well, let me go check out what's going on. And I never went back. So I just left Silicon Valley behind, went all in on ag tech, helped build the Thrive Accelerator up to a pretty good position. And then when Western Growers spot came open, I said, man, that looks really enticing. I knew Hank Ickless, obviously he's a legend in the business, did some great stuff, built up the Western Growers Innovation team with a lot of support from Bruce Taylor, Dennis Donahue, then the mayor, now my colleague. And so that combination of ag and tech just really hit me at a good time and a good spot. And it's been a fun 10 years.
Tell us a little bit more about the role that Western Growers plays. Like, what is Western Growers, and how does Western Growers fit into the ag ecosystem?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Tyler, because it is so unusual, right? So we are not an events and membership-driven trade group. We are actually a trade group supported by a family of companies that does investments, insurance, benefits, healthcare, all this stuff. And I like the insurance business okay before. I have to like them now because they fund all my stuff. And so when Dave Puglia took the big chair back in 2020 and brought me on, he basically said, look, I'm going to double down on the Hank Ickless position. I'm going to make a VP of science out of Deanne Davis. I'm going to make a VP of innovation out of Walt. And we're going to roll on and we're going to do stuff for the membership that not just advocates in Sacramento, DC, and not just gives them healthcare and benefits and stuff like that for a group that's a little bit underserved. We're actually going to try and solve their problems at a technology level. And obviously you guys are living this, but two of the bigger problems then were labor and food safety. And the only small change in that agenda, and Dave and I both signed up at dinner at Tarpey's. We're like, okay, 15 years, let's go. That's the big thing. And this was a big shift for him because he knew Sacramento really well. And I sort of asked him, I said, what's the commitment level? He goes, Walt, I told the board, I got 15 years and we were both 55 at the time. I got 15 years and I want to work on solving labor. I want to work on solving food safety. The only thing that changed in the intervening 4 or 5 years is we changed food safety and slotted it down to 2B, and we put the chemistry pressure because the pressure on pesticides, herbicide, fungicides is just increasing at a frightening rate. Western Europe, US, California, and the buyers are all putting the hammer down. So that's the only changes. How do we solve labor? That's how obviously a lot of automation. How do we solve chemistry? That's a lot of biologicals and genetics. So that's what we work on. Basically, how can we help those startups in those spaces get down the playing field? And the folks that are at the 50-yard line, we really focus on getting them into the red zone and getting them into the end zone. And I won't make a Niners joke because it's a hell of a bad season. But yeah, that's the deal. Get the folks that are midfield, help them out because we're capital constrained. You guys have seen the numbers on venture capital. It's ugly. It's not getting prettier. We can talk about the structural reasons why that is. But ag tech's going to be tough for the next couple of years. I can't tell you the number of calls I've gotten from founders who are friends this year going, hey, And it's that call. It's like, hey, I'm either I'm almost done or I'm cash out. And can you help? Can you help give me transition? Of course I help, but it's happening really way too often.
Well, let's dig into this technology and innovation piece. You sit in a pretty interesting position where you're kind of helping do due diligence on these companies that are trying to get market and kind of get to the Western grower base and kind of get adoption on farm. Like, talk to us about the approach. I know you have a handful of events with FIRA and the Biological Summit to kind of bridge the gap there. You have the Center for Innovation and Technology out there in Salinas. So maybe just talk to us about kind of how you move these companies through the process. How do you come across them, and really how do you get them to the finish line?
Yeah, really, we've made some big strides the last 4 years in getting kind of a real good focus on those two areas, automation and biologicals. Because of that, obviously, we launched FIRA, got that going. And the third year was our biggest one at Woodland. We got more people to Woodland than Salinas, guys. Who the heck would have thought? We had 1,000 people the first day of FIRA. It was fantastic. I think what we've managed to do is put our events at the forefront by really making them focused. FIRA is just about specialty crop automation. Biological is just about biologicals and genetics. We don't cover anything else. And those two events, I think, have become world-class in just a couple of years. So once we identify, and I think that's just by getting the growers, the startups, the investors in one room for a couple of days, you just get, in the case of YOLO, in one set of acreage, to just go out and show this thing off and demo it and do that stuff. So I think after the events got locked and loaded, we really buckled down on the process. So if you think about the two big moves we're making in the last 6 months going into 2025, we rolled out case studies. These are really detailed economic analysis of things like Carbon Robotics and their laser weeder, Stout's mechanical weeders, the second one it launched last week. And the big thing there is, what's it look like from the grower side, right? So what you pay for labor in year one and what did it turn into once you bought the robot and didn't have to pay for as much labor in year two, that savings works against the cost of that robot. So basically what everyone looks at Carbon Robotics says is, hey, Walt, how can I buy one of these? Well, the short version is, if you know what your math is like on a savings basis and can forecast, then you work against that on an actual and you know what it's like. With the case study, we actually helped them understand what Braga Fresh looked at in doing the math and what JV Smith looked like in doing the math. And then we're in the process of rolling out, and I'll have the webinar next week with Ben's automation template, Ben's economic template, as I call it. And this is what Ben used at Carbon Robotics and FarmWise and Stout, right? He's been at 3 startups. And the notion of this template to help the growers do their math is great. So case studies, feeding into economic templates, feeding into soon Western Grower Assist, where if you're too busy to track down all the numbers of labor and automation, we'll help you. We'll help you do that for you for a charge. And it's your choice, do it yourself or not. So case studies to templates and Assist is a great step forward for the business, we think. And then secondly, Reservoir Farms, which we launched at YOLO as well at FIRA. Reservoir Farms is really the first on-farm robotics incubator, right? So the firms like Carbon Robotics, FarmWise, working up in the Bay Area, right? Let's not force the next 10 to be in the Bay Area, paying for their own tractors, paying for their own acreage, paying for their own everything, right? Let's give them a subscription where they can join Reservoir Farms, come out, be the robotics incubator, and then have demo and test field acreage feed away. And so we'll have 2 locations for that in the next 6 months. We're hoping. We've got good partners on that one. UCA&R is with us. Merced College is with us and has supported it financially. Hartnell College is with us and has supported it financially. And Western Growers, we're in the process of getting a financial commitment as well from our side. But imagine Merced College and Denny Reuter Smart Farm having a little chunk of acreage for us. And imagine a comparable set of land in Salinas Valley off the 68 that can service both fruits and vegetables. So fruits and veg in Salinas and trees and vines more up in the Merced side. And that's really where we want Reservoir Farms to be in about a year. It's just a place for these startups to really do the hard grind, the long miles of iterate, feedback, and then demo it and show it off and get the customer conversations going.
So much stuff happening, and it's so cool to see. You keep yourself busy, Walt, and somehow you manage to post on LinkedIn at a prolific rate. At all hours, I'm getting the notification on LinkedIn. Walt posted about something, and of course, yes. I have to stop what I'm doing and read the insight. So we want to dig into that actually a little bit, Walt. You recently put together kind of a slide deck detailing California's labor problem. Can we walk through that a little bit? I think it's helpful. Sometimes we on this podcast we're like, oh, labor's a problem. and automation is needed. And we talk to startups that are doing automation, but I think it's really helpful to actually dig into like what is actually happening. Why is this a problem? So I'd love to dig into this if you want to kind of get us kicked off here with what led you to start this research.
Yeah, I know. So it's interesting. And yeah, we'll kind of talk through the deck, obviously verbally. The interesting part is it was already sort of halfway done about 6 months ago. I was already decently good at telling people, here's the scope of the labor problem here. I quantified it. We put a lot of numbers behind it. And I'd say we either, and you can see the cost factors aren't changing, right? All the stuff that drives it up isn't changing. So you can either solve it with automation or we're just not gonna be able to solve it. And they'd be like, well, okay, so the growers are just going to figure it out. Growers are just going to. And finally, I realized after a trip to Peru in January, I'm like, no, you know what? We're not going to solve it. The growers are going to solve it because they're going to move. And so sure enough, they had been looking at South America, looking at Mexico, looking at Peru. I got a chance to see firsthand a couple of our bigger operators down there in Peru doing the hard work, doing the heavy lift. And you just realize, okay, here's my or. Either we solve this with automation or the acreage keeps moving to Peru. And when you dug into the numbers and you talk to the Peruvian government, you talk to the Peruvian growers, you talk to our growers down there, you realized they're in a massive opportunity position to really take advantage of some of the things that we are giving them candidly more opportunity to go get, right? So if you want to make sense, kind of talk through the deck real quick and then sort of circle. Yeah. So if you think about it, just in terms of numbers, I'll walk you through the high level. California alone, right? We use about 850 million hours of ag labor a year. It costs us about $16.3 billion. So just, full stop on that, right? The ag GDP is like in the 50 to 60 billion range. Third of that's going right to labor, right? And it's only getting higher. The regulatory costs are way up. Cal Poly's Lynn Hamilton will tell you it's up 8x in 12 years, from 109 an acre per year to 977. Main three drivers. Food safety, right? That was back in the spinach era, right? So LGMA and Food Safety Modernization Act would be two of them. Obamacare for healthcare and minimum wage overtime and break rules. So massive regulatory lift all translates into more bodies, right? And more costs. And then more H2A is the other big problem because the lack of domestic workforce turns out the next generation of kids would rather work at McDonald's and Jamba than work on the ranch. I get it. That wasn't an option for me. We were 25 miles away from McDonald's. And I don't think I would have been able to do it anyway. I was going to work on the ranch. And so when H2A kicks in, people don't realize it's not just the difference in wages, right? So California, about $17.25 for domestic, about $19.75 an hour for AWAR, adverse effect wage rate labor, the H2A labor. But never forget that on top of that labor, you've got housing, transport, and food. That's another $7 to $9 an hour. So I like to remind people in Sacramento that sometimes forget $30 an hour isn't a coming attraction. $30 an hour is basically here now, right? If you throw that $9 an hour on top of that 1975 AWAR, we're right there right now. So $30 an hour here. And you compare that to Peru, where they're at $4 going on $5 an hour. They are, what is that? 32 to $40 a day. That's some compelling math, right? So that's when I really started digging into it, was you look at the cost and the differences. And the other factor is because we've 3x'd our California H2A usage up to, what's the number, 44,000 over the last 5 years, we're now 10% of California's workforce is H2A, and that's up from 0 to 1% like 10 years ago. So as we move that number, that per hour number goes to 20, 21, 22 because H2A skews it with every percentage point that it grabs. So that's the headline for labor is more expensive, no end in sight. We're not going to back any of this stuff off. So then you look at the acreage and farmer loss, right? And this is the massive headline that I try and give everyone. I took the USDA numbers every 5 years from their census and I rolled it out forward for another 30 years. And the short version is we're forecast to lose 32% of our state acreage, 9 million acres between 1997 and 2052. And we're forecast to lose 51% of our farms, right? So down 45,000. We'll be under 45,000 in 2052, which hopefully is in all of our lifetimes. But you look at that acreage count, that farmer count, like, holy cow, right? So then you say, how are we doing with automation? And you guys know as well as anybody, right? Some success on the revenue side. We'll get to 200 million this year, it looks like, in automation sales. That's a nice effort, but it's across all the companies, not one. So it's not that interesting to venture capital. Even if we get to like 800 million to $1 billion in the next couple of 2-3 years, that's still not a very interesting category for venture capital, right? So the successes in things like weeding, like we already mentioned, spraying, Gus over your way, eco robotics coming in from Europe, great first year. Verdant's out there. Burrow's doing harvest assist. Burrow and FarmNG on the small platform side, they're doing some good stuff. They've got, I think Burrow said publicly 350. I would say Charlie would be comfortable saying 400 by now because that was a springtime number. They might be closer to 450. FarmNG, I know their end of year number last year was 100. They probably doubled that plus this year. So you're seeing robots of all sizes and all dollar amounts getting out there in market. Where we're not seeing success, and it is the problem because it's 2/3 of the labor, is harvest. Harvest is just the impossible last mile. Being able to put that end effector that can pick that fruit or veg and put it in a bin without messing it up is just proven to be really hard. And so we do see some good activity. Deere's made some acquisitions, Smart Apply and Bear Flag. They joint ventured with Gus over your way. I'd love to see that turn into another transaction if we end up getting that. Case New Holland has done Raven and Stout last couple of years. Kubota just did Bloomfield this year. Talked to the guys on both sides. That seems to be a good deal. And then Carbon Robotics, NVIDIA and Bond, the ex-Sequoia guy, are now on their cap table, on their investor table. That's exciting news. And they've raised over $150 million. So to me, Carbon Robotics holds a disproportionate amount of the future of the space in their hands because they're out there in market. They've raised, they've got good momentum. But that's the automation story.
Yeah, let's dig into the labor piece a little bit. You mentioned like going down to Peru. I've been down there as well. Like, and I feel like there's definitely a trend of more imported fruits and vegetables in the U.S. I think it's 60% of fruit and 40% of veg. Like, what's your like opinion on like tariffs? I know like Trump's floated like a 20% tariff with Mexico because we get a lot of our vegetables coming from Mexico. Like, will that help the issue? Like, it seems like there's not a super level playing field. Like, as costs in California get incrementally higher on labor, like very hard to compete. Like we've talked about California asparagus that was once a booming crop for California has gone to Peru and Mexico. So maybe just talk about your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think the tariffs will be interesting, right? So who he makes threats against and who actually gets implemented against are interesting. And the retaliation is in the interesting second layer, right? So is he going to do this to Mexico? Are we going to make Justin the governor of the 51st state? Who knows to the north with Canada? But from the Mexico side, I would have to say if you throw tariffs on them, that will impact the Mexico production. Like I saw a New York Times article today that was saying, avocados are now a luxury item if Trump gets his way. And okay, Times, we'll see. But I think the reality is a lot of folks are just bypassing Mexico, going straight down to South America because it flips the hemisphere and it allows them to be, straight calendar fill instead of just, it's a different calendar fill in Mexico, right? So I think if you tariff Mexico and don't tariff South America, you end up with a very interesting dynamic for Peru generally because they can basically get it to California pretty easily. And what's really interesting is on the Peru side, that new port that they've got is $3.6 billion in China Belt and Road Initiative. And it is awesome. It is deep water. It is automated. It is the opposite of Los Angeles and Long Beach, right? We have out-of-date garbage ports with terrible union negotiations from the ag side, right? And just an awful lot of inefficiency and policies over decades that have not upgraded those ports. They're not as deep water as they should be. They don't have as much capacity as they should efficiently, right? They have capacity. Like Peru can only do 25% of LA's capacity. But from what I've heard, they're already implementing better processes for getting stuff in and out than LA's able to do. And the LA conduit to roads and trains are just very outdated back there. So Peru's got a shiny new port. I'll share with you guys one of the Dune Insights learnings. I was on a panel there with Eric Morgan from Braga pitching this deck, and then Alfonso Bustamante from one of the large equity players down there. He said, Walt, this Peru port changes the game. Before I had to put it on a slow road to the bottom of Mexico to put it on a decent sized boat in a non-deep water port, and it was 52 days to China. The new port above Lima, quicker road, bigger boat, bigger port, better system, 21 days. Well, you guys know what 21 days against 52 means for a fresh guy, right? He's super happy. And you could imagine that same port above Lima getting used to drop stuff right up to California or to the U.S. if they wanted it to. I think that would be great. So I think who gets the tariffs implemented against them will be interesting. I think who doesn't will be interesting. I think on the other side, who retaliates will be interesting. We'll see if Mexico actually means it and they're going to retaliate. And then we'll see how China and Peru decide to act strategically. Do they want to try and come in and fill some of that gap or make us feel some pain? I, wouldn't want to bet on that one, to be honest. Just want to watch.
All right, well, let's get into the VC side of things, how the outlook is in Silicon Valley and AgTech.
Yeah, boy, this one, and you know it, Tyler, you've been a Rivian, right? You know the game. So check out the IPO numbers, right? And it took me a while. I started looking back into it like 2023, 2022. It's when you really get back to 21 where you see the story unfold, right? So we were trundling along at hundreds of IPOs. COVID hit. People went crazy. People decided IPOs were awesome. And we had 1,000 of them in 2021, 1,085 in 2021, just full stop on that, right? And if you want to know why the California economy is struggling, let's listen to this next number, right? Because we know how much the California economy relies on tech. Well, over 2 years from 2021 to 2023, we dropped to 154 IPOs in 2023, 85% drop. And you guys know this, but we'll explain to the audience. The way that capital flows into the markets is limited partners, right? Family offices and other strategic investors. They write checks to venture capitalists. They write checks to startups. They IPO or get acquired, some percentage of them, obviously, more is better. And then that capital all flows back. And when the VCs look for the next round, the LP says, hey, you gave me my money back and then some, I'll write you another check. And that funds Fund 2 and Fund 3 and Fund 4. Well, right now, Fund 2, Fund 3, and Fund 4 aren't happening, right? And in fact, venture capital writ large, not agri-food tech, dropped by half in 2 years, 345 down to 171, right? So massive hit. What happened was the LP started writing checks because the founders and venture capitalists got really creative on how they can do stuff. And actually, it's funny. I've been listening to the Acquired podcast. Hat tip to you guys for the tip on that a couple of years back, but it's awesome. You look at what SoftBank did, that $100 billion fund. That was the precursor to letting folks stay private longer and avoid the public scrutiny, regulatory, and shareholder activists, to be honest, that none of us would want as a public company if we could avoid it. So they figured out ways to make the founders whole, but that didn't create the circle of goodness that got the cash back into the system, right? So this staying private longer is turning out to be a problem. We now have more private unicorns than public unicorns. Whoa. Full stop on that one, right? And so the money's not circulating through the system. The only bright spot in big venture, as opposed to agri-food tech venture, was AI, $50 billion, which will help the AI stuff, which will trickle down and help ag. But other than that, there was not a lot of goodness in in Silicon Valley tech the last couple of years. And if we roll through to just the agri-food tech part, right? So look at the 10-year run we had from $2 billion in agri-food tech venture capital in 2013. Climate Corp gets picked up for $1 billion. Investors and founders get excited and say, hey, clearly something's going on at the farm. Zoom up to 53 billion, right? In 10 years up to 2021. Then we took the big haircut, right? Down to 31 billion. Everyone's like, oh, which one's the outlier, 53 or 31? I'm like, I'm guessing the lower. You could see it coming in 2022. And then 2023, we're down to 16 billion. At the first half of 24, we're at 7, right? So we're mirroring in agri-food tech the exact same problems and tendencies that are in Silicon Valley tech. The only problem is we're even worse because we're a slower segment to return with lower exit count and lower M&A values in a lot of cases. So our exits aren't as good. They're not as frequent. They take longer. Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play, right? And so we've seen a 70% drop in capital in the space. I'll call out 2 segments as particularly troublesome. CEA, the vertical farming kids, and alternative protein, the Beyond Meat, Impossible Burger kids, they were 42% of that 2021 capital. So as I joke, it was all blood money. We'd give it all back if we could. If agri-food tech had never been above 30 billion, I will confidently forecast we'd be in a better position now. But we couldn't do it. We went to 53. Now we're eating it on the downside. And from what I see, we will be here until the exits come back. And you guys know AgTech, it's hard to find IPOs. So we will be here until Deere, Bayer, Syngenta, Agco, CNHI get the checkbook back. You guys know what's happened to farmer revenue. You guys know what happened to equipment and input manufacturers revenue. It's not great, right? So I'm forecasting a couple more years of tough sledding for automation and biologicals, our 2 main segments, because you just, until the exit funnel is widened back open, you're not going to see the front end coming back.
Yeah, so you're thinking like to kind of land this plane, we need to wait for the market to turn around and have like more M&A activity where some of these companies aren't a standalone business. They just get folded in and kind of rolled up into bigger orgs. Exactly.
So if the robotic startups, the automation guys can't get dollars, right? And if the farm can't buy more robots and get that 850 million hours and 16.3 billion nut fixed, what happens? Well, I took a look at the ag exports for a couple geographies. LATAM, U.S., big picture, California, Peru, small picture. LATAM's about a double for the last 18, 20 years, 52 up to 108 billion. Pretty good growth. They're now 17%-ish of the global ag export picture. U.S. did a nice jump, 65 billion to 179, about 175. So from that metric, you're like, okay, U.S. is still outperforming all segments, Latin America, which is everything below Mexico, basically. But then you dive in and you say, okay, how's California doing? Well, we pulled off about a 141% lift, just under 10 billion up to 23.6. But look at Peru, right? So here you got 100, 175, 141 in Peru, 2,180%, right? They went from 465 million ag exports in 2000 to 10.6 billion in 2022. And you guys know the spaces, right? It's the blueberries, it's table grapes, it's all the acreage, a lot of the acreage that we've been running off with Sigma, labor, water constraints. South America, Peru's only been too happy to welcome them in, and they are making a bunch of good decisions, right? We talked about the port. That's a big investment. Good job with China. China's got a couple on the Brazil side. They're talking about Chile. They could have a four corners approach in about 10 years, right? Where they've got Lima, Chile, Brazil South and Brazil North. They can go both directions at that point from South America, right? So if people think they're not trying to cut us off, the Chinese, and make South America into a favorite trading partner, I don't know what they're watching, because the data is pretty clear and the investment dollars are pretty clear. We talked about water, right? So Peru, I saw it firsthand. They're not solving the groundwater problem with groundwater. They're solving it with surface water. So when I was there, you listen to the Peruvians talk about the number of reservoirs they want to put across the country. It's all over the place for big dollars, and they're making it easier, a lot easier. Have you guys put water storage on your ranch?
We don't have water storage. We're all surface in the Delta.
Okay. So we did, and we put about almost a half mile square reservoir in for the grapes, for the wine grapes, about 25 years ago. Thank goodness it was 25, 30 years ago. I can't imagine. When I talk to my friends now that put in reservoirs, it's a much different process now. We really regulatory the heck out of water storage. Peru does not. So it's easier to basically say, we had a guy doing terraces up a hill, and every other terrace, he would put water storage and circulate that area. And the permit process, I won't even bore you with how easy it was. Let's just say it's a lot easier to hear. About an afternoon. So a lot easier to get that water done. And so basically growers are left with one question. Do I want to try and invest further in acreage up here in production facilities in California? Or what's it going to look like if I take some capital, deploy it elsewhere, and put my acreage and my production facilities down there? And now that port's coming in, I think the answer may change again. So Peru making a lot of good investments. The other thing I will mention, and I put a picture of this on the slide, it's economic development. The only two, so the three biggest economy drivers in Peru are mining, about half, ag and tourism, largely the other half. And I think tourism's a little bigger than ag at the moment. They'd like to flip those around and grab some of mining share if they can. So the only two economic development areas they are doing are tourism and ag. And when you go to IFPA and you see 25,000 people in Atlanta and they're all walking by the big 40 by 40 booth called Avocados in Peru, you realize, and I said this to CDFA, to their board a couple of weeks ago at FIRA, I said, they're not asking permission to talk to our growers. They're not sending us a note saying, hey, I'm talking to growers. They're just talking to our growers and bringing them down, right? So it's a great investment to be at IFPA with a 40 by 40 booth. We'll see how it pays off. But when you look at the amount of avocados they've already got down there and the amount of acres they have to bring into play to put even more down there, it should get everyone's attention up here.
Well, you painted kind of a bleak picture with the numbers, with the ag census data of just like farming in California is challenging. Like, do you see, like, what do you see happening to kind of flip this and have farming be viable? Like, what's your kind of long-term view? What needs to happen to kind of have growers remain in California and be viable here?
Yeah, it's funny, Tim, I talked to the IV veg growers, the Imperial Valley veg growers. I know that group, right? I've talked to CDFA. I've talked to the Bonnie Doon guys, the Doon Insight guys now, kind of big thinkers. And I'm talking to Chamber of Commerce's, the King City Chamber is next week or a couple of weeks. And then I'm talking to a couple of the Salinas chambers. We have got to get this dynamic much better understood by Sacramento. And we've got to get the political lobbying force behind us that we can and say, listen, if we don't get more water storage, and you saw today, Gavin's talking about finishing off Sites Reservoir, right? Love to see it, right? And yes, some other stuff would go away and we wouldn't do that, but at least we get Sites done and built. We really haven't put water storage in play at scale since the 50s or 60s, right? My grandfather's generation down in Paso Robles area with Nacimiento and San Antonio was the last one I know of on the coast. And that services kind of San Luis and Monterey counties. So I think water is one of the big issues. I think labor is another. Western Growers and a big consortium made a pretty big play to try and get some PAGA changes and some PAGA reforms off the private attorney general stuff, the lawsuits that happen, the extortion suits, let's be honest, that they get when they find a workplace violation, right? We need to make those less expensive. There's 5,000 of those a year now in California. They're $1 million each. So if we can back off the PAGA, make that a little more reasonable, if we can rethink some of the labor policies that we've just overregulated the last several years. And I know these are all individually big lifts, right? It's labor, it's water, and then the third rock for me is energy. So if you want to keep growers involved, I think you'd need to show a commitment to sites or something like it. You need to show a commitment to getting labor more reasonable or more under control at least. I'm not even sure what that, to be honest, looks like on an implementation basis. I just know $30 an hour labor is really hard to compete. And then lastly, energy. We have an energy policy right now that is based on scarcity and conservation of energy, and artificial intelligence is going to blow that up in real time, right? So all these net zero mandates and EV mandates around tractors and 18-wheelers and anything bigger than a Rivian or an F-150 is crazy talk, right? We don't have the grid for it. We're probably losing carb subsidies for those EV vehicles anyway. And you might have saw, the space, Tyler. Monarch is probably the high profile kid in the class, and they just made a huge pivot, right? And you can argue why that is, and I would, and what that means. But I think it means nothing good for the electric tractor space at the moment, because anybody who's coming into it now has to live with the question, how are you not Monarch V2, right? And that's totally a fair question. So I think without a big rethink around energy to make it reliable, multi-pronged. We need a portfolio of energy in the state. We need a strategic energy approach in California that can do things like AI here, because you guys saw the slides. I mean, all these industries we would have led in 40 years ago when I was a kid, and even when you guys were kids, maybe, because I think I got you by age by a little bit. Your kids are way younger than mine. We would have led in crypto. We would have led in data centers. We would have led in all these great, spaces like autonomous and drones and SpaceX and all that stuff. And right now we are handing all of that business to other places. So I think the big three are water, energy, and labor. And the big one behind that for California is you have got to stop running founders and builders off at a frightening rate. And I said this to the CDFA board, whatever you think of Elon's politics, and some of the Coastal Commission knuckleheads basically denied him a Vandenberg launch permit because they didn't like his politics. Whatever you think about his politics, that dude who's the ultimate alpha dog among alpha dogs of all time, moving everything to Texas, huge hit for California, huge hit now. And all of Elon's guys who moved with him to Texas, where are they going to start their next company? Probably not here, right? So that's the two-pronged animal. Policies have to change, and the approach to entrepreneurs and builders has to change. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure either one of those is going to change the level it needs to.
Totally. No, I mean, there's so many things that need to go right. But I also believe in California agriculture and believe that, things are that we're gonna make progress. So it's like this combination of optimism and skepticism, right? Because I think there are a lot of challenges, and we need to encourage innovation, entrepreneurship in the state, in agriculture is really critical.
The AgTech stuff does get me excited, Tyler. And I would say this, I would say the umbrella behind all the stuff I just mentioned, the policies, water, energy, labor, the approach to founders, at its core, this is going to come down to trade policy, right? Even if we can't get that right, the one thing we better get right is trade policy, because I'm coming to the conclusion after looking at the ag export numbers for the last 25 years, that domestic production in a lot of key areas is going up, right? So a lot of Eastern Europe, going up. Forget Western Europe. They're doing some silly stuff. I can't apply to any of that. But you're getting growth in domestic production in so many places now. Your trade windows are getting smaller, right? And I think you're going to end up in a position where you have to look at the game board and you have to say, are we playing Monopoly, where I just get to do laps and build houses and hotels and collect $200 every time I pass go? Or is it a risk board where the places are already in place and there's not too much I can move around? I would posit that 25 years ago, we probably had Monopoly. And I would argue sitting there in 2024 going into 2025, it's more like a risk board. There's less pieces you can move. There's less moves you can make, in my opinion. And I think for that reason, the trade policy folks in Sacramento for California ag, in DC for US ag, they really have got to sharpen the pencils and get the thinking hats on, because we have to get creative around all this trade stuff, because China's not done. And China's been fighting an economic war while we've been stuck fighting a military war, and it's dragging resources and spending time and spending money. And it took our eye off the trade ball, and China has just swooped in and done really, really well with their trade policy. Good on them. Shame on us. But if I couldn't change the policies and couldn't change the entrepreneur approach, at least get me some trade policy I can let growers grow into, and then let the innovators come in, be near the acreage, and create that next generation of farm workers that's going to be a lot more technical, make a much different wage structure, or maybe they can't afford to live in California with AgTech jobs.
I think that's a great place to wrap it, Walt. This was long overdue. We definitely need to have you back on again at some point to go through your next deck. Walt, as we wrap up, how can listeners get in touch and connect with everything you got going on at Western Growers?
Yeah, LinkedIn's great. Hit me up there, and I'll give you those notifications Tyler was bragging about. And obviously, email's great, wduflock@wga.com. And I'll be honest, I don't mind giving out the mobile, 949-345-5997. Ping me, guys. I'm at conferences and love to talk ag and ag tech whenever I can.
So, Tim, what do you think of the call with Walt?
Long overdue. It was good to finally have him on the pod to talk through just some of the realities of farming in California and US, and really thought it was interesting talking trade and kind of like what's happening in the Southern Hemisphere with Peru and how that could impact production in California, talking through the labor piece. And I think Western Growers just plays a really interesting role in the industry, being able to kind of diligence and audit kind of companies coming to market, and thought what they're doing with their test farms and Hawk Tower that you mentioned that we're going to be having on next week was just really interesting.
Awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. We'll be back next week. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and check out the Modern Acre Co-op. Thanks, guys.